The cameras were supposed to catch a thief. Instead, they caught something that made a billionaire cry alone in his office at 2 in the morning, watching a man he had never even spoken to kneel down and pray over a little girl's shoes. What that camera recorded would change 3 lives forever, and by the end of the story, it might just change how you see the people you walk past every single day. The single dad had been cleaning the Whitmore mansion for 11 months. Every night, from 6 to midnight, he pushed a cart through marble hallways bigger than his entire apartment, wiping down floors that never seemed to get dirty in the first place. He never met the owner. He only knew the name from the mail. Mr. Whitmore was rumored to be cold, distant, a man who had built an empire and lost his family somewhere along the way. The staff whispered that he watched everyone. Cameras in every hallway, every room except the private quarters. Most workers hated it. The single dad barely noticed. He had bigger worries. His daughter, only 7 years old, was sick. Not the kind of sick that goes away with rest. The kind that came with hospital bills stacked so high he had stopped opening the envelopes. His wife had passed 2 years earlier, and since then, it had just been the two of them, him and his little girl, learning how to survive without her mother. He worked this job at night and a warehouse shift during the day, sleeping maybe 4 hours if he was lucky. One night, exhausted beyond words, he sat down in the mansion's grand hallway during his 15-minute break. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo of his daughter in her hospital gown, smiling despite everything, because that was who she was. She never complained. She just kept asking when she could go back to school. He wiped his eyes fast, embarrassed, even though he thought no one was watching. But someone was. In a private office on the other side of the country, Mr. Whitmore sat reviewing security footage like he did every week, mostly out of habit, mostly out of loneliness disguised as diligence. He almost skipped past the clip, but something made him pause. He watched a tired man in a gray uniform sitting on cold marble floors, staring at a photo like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Whitmore leaned closer to the screen. He didn't know why, but he kept watching. Weeks passed. The billionaire found himself checking the footage more often, not out of suspicion anymore, but out of something he couldn't quite name. He watched the single dad work harder than anyone else on staff, humming quietly to keep himself awake, sometimes whispering things to himself that sounded like prayers. One night, the cameras caught him kneeling beside a pair of small shoes left by the back door, shoes that belonged to Whitmore's housekeeper's granddaughter. The single dad picked them up gently, noticed a torn strap, and the next night, he brought his own tools from home and fixed them, leaving them exactly where he found them, saying nothing to anyone. Whitmore stared at that footage for a long time. He thought about his own son, who hadn't spoken to him in 6 years. He thought about all the money he had, and how none of it had ever fixed anything that actually mattered. Then one evening, the cameras caught something that broke him completely. The single dad, thinking he was alone, sat on the floor of the East Wing and called someone on speakerphone. It was his daughter's doctor. Whitmore watched the man's shoulders drop as he listened, watched him press a fist against his mouth to keep from making a sound. The treatment his daughter needed wasn't covered. $50,000 he didn't have and had no way of getting. When the call ended, the single dad sat there in silence for almost 10 minutes, staring at nothing, before he stood up, wiped his face, and went right back to work like nothing had happened. Whitmore didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He asked his assistant for the employee file of the janitorial staff member who worked the night shift in the East Wing. When he saw the man's name for the first time, he just sat there holding the paper for a long moment. Meanwhile, life kept crushing down on the single dad. His daughter's condition worsened. The hospital started talking about timelines in a way that terrified him. He picked up more shifts, running on coffee and desperation, until one night he simply collapsed in the hallway from exhaustion. It was Maria, the head housekeeper, who found him. She had noticed him struggling for weeks but never said anything, respecting his pride. This time she couldn't stay quiet. "You need help?" she said, kneeling beside him. There's no shame in that. He shook his head, embarrassed. I don't want charity. I just need time. She just needs time. Maria didn't argue. She simply helped him up and walked him to a chair, and for the first time in months, someone sat with him while he cried. Really cried. The kind of crying a person does when they've been holding everything together alone for far too long. What the single dad didn't know was that Maria had already spoken to Whitmore days earlier, worried about the man who worked harder than anyone but never asked for anything. Whitmore had listened quietly, then asked her one question. Does he know I've been watching? She said no. He nodded and said nothing else. 3 days later, the single dad was called into an office he had never been allowed to enter. He assumed he was being fired for falling asleep on the job. His hands were shaking as he walked in. Instead, he found Mr. Whitmore standing by the window, not behind some enormous desk like he expected, just standing there, looking tired in a way that surprised him. Sit down, Whitmore said gently. The single dad sat, bracing himself. Whitmore turned around and said something that made the room feel like it had stopped breathing. I've been watching you for months, not to catch you doing something wrong. I couldn't look away, because you kept doing something right, over and over, when no one was watching and nothing was in it for you. The single dad didn't know what to say. Whitmore continued, his voice breaking slightly. I fixed a lot of things in my life with money, companies, buildings, empires, but I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. My son hasn't spoken to me in 6 years because I was always too busy building things instead of being there. I watched you choose your daughter every single night, even when you were falling apart. I want to help you keep choosing her. Whitmore explained that he had already spoken with the hospital that morning. Every bill, past and future, would be covered completely. Not as charity, he said, but as something closer to gratitude, because watching this man had reminded him what actually mattered in life. The single dad broke down right there in that office, unable to hold back the flood of relief and disbelief and grief all at once. Why me? He whispered. Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? Whitmore sat down across from him, and for the first time he looked like just a man, not a billionaire. Because you showed me who I stopped being. And I think it's not too late for either of us to fix that. 6 months later, the single dad's daughter walked out of the hospital doors on her own 2 feet, laughing, healthy, holding her father's hand so tight he thought his fingers might go numb. Whitmore was there too, standing a little to the side, watching with an expression no one on his staff had ever seen on him before. Something soft, something human. He had used part of his fortune to fund treatment for other struggling families at that same hospital, inspired entirely by one tired man who never once asked for help, who simply kept showing up with love in his hands even when life gave him every reason to stop. And in a quiet twist nobody saw coming, Whitmore's own son heard about what his father had done, read about it in a small local article, and for the first time in 6 years, he picked up the phone and called him. Sometimes it takes witnessing someone else's love to remember your own. The single dad still works, though not as a night janitor anymore. Whitmore made sure of that, but he says the job never really mattered. What mattered was that during the darkest year of his life, someone was paying attention, not to judge him but to learn from him. And that's the lesson this story leaves us with. You never truly know who's watching your quiet acts of love, your patience, your sacrifices done in silence. Kindness is never wasted, even when it feels like no one notices. Sometimes the smallest, most unseen moments are the ones that end up changing everything. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Wings of Kindness for more inspiring stories. Remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life forever.